Monica Bellucci made a promise once: never talk about marriage. For years she kept it. Then, slowly, in scattered interviews across 2 decades, she started breaking that silence, one sentence at a time. What she's finally confirmed about her 18 years with Vincent Cassel isn't the scandal tabloids wanted. It's quieter than that, and it's aimed less at him than at herself. Proof of exactly what she survived and what he's been chasing ever since, twice over, in the years right after her. Here's her story, in order, film by film, secret by secret, right up to the marriage everyone still asks her about. It starts in Città di Castello, a small town in Umbria. Monica Anna Maria Bellucci was born there on September 30th, 1964, the only child of Pasquale Bellucci and a mother who painted for a living. At 13, a local photographer asked to shoot some photos. She said yes, out of curiosity, nothing more. At 18, she enrolled at the University of Perugia to study law. She waited tables at a pizzeria to cover tuition. She had every intention of becoming a lawyer. Modeling was just supposed to pay the bills. It didn't stay that way. By 1988, the side job had swallowed the law degree whole. She moved to Milan, shared a cramped room with another young immigrant, and signed with Elite Model Management. Within a few years, she was walking runways in Paris and New York, one of the era's most sought-after faces, booking campaigns for houses like Dolce & Gabbana. By any ordinary measure, she had already made it before she ever stepped in front of a film camera. Acting arrived by accident. A producer named Roman Coppola saw photographs of her and mentioned her to his father. Francis Ford Coppola cast her as one of the 3 brides of Dracula in 1992's Bram Stoker's Dracula, alongside Gary Oldman, Winona Ryder, and a young Keanu Reeves. It was barely a cameo, wordless, brief, over almost as soon as it started. But Bellucci has said that one small scene told her something modeling never had, that acting was what she actually wanted. She went home to Rome and started formal training in 1989, working through Italian television films while she learned a craft nobody had ever taught her. Her first real English language role came a few years later in Under Suspicion, opposite Morgan Freeman and Gene Hackman. She remembers arriving at Cannes for the premiere, trembling with nerves, an Italian model turned actress standing among 2 decades of Hollywood royalty. It was Hackman who noticed. He told her simply that she didn't need to feel that way, that she just had to be present and let the rest take care of itself. Small words. She's credited them ever since with giving her the nerve to walk into rooms like that one for the rest of her career. Then came 1996 and a film called L'Appartement. It earned her a César nomination for Most Promising Actress. It also put her across from a French actor named Vincent Cassel, already known at home for his breakout César-nominated role in La Haine the year before. Cassel avoided actresses on set, worried it would follow him around professionally, and by his own account had never stayed with anyone longer than 3 or 4 months. He assumed, going in, that Bellucci had only been cast for her looks. "I have learned that acting is not about beauty," he later admitted. "Monica gets work because she is a brilliant actress." That realization undid every assumption he'd walked in with. Within months, they were together. He's since described their bond as something built on difference rather than similarity. "Monica has been in the public eye since she was 16, he said once. She taught me to not take myself too seriously, especially around the media." Within a year, they were filming a second project side by side, 1997's Doberman, a hyper-violent, hyper-stylized crime thriller shot on a $5 million budget, with Cassel as a ruthless bank robber and Bellucci as his loyal, deaf-mute girlfriend, riding shotgun through a string of increasingly savage heists. Two actors playing devoted partners on screen at the exact moment they were falling for each other off it. It reads now like foreshadowing nobody meant to write. Few people know that Cassel came from acting royalty and almost walked away from it entirely. His father, Jean-Pierre Cassel, had been a major French film star for decades, a fixture of European cinema since the 1960s. Vincent ignored his father's advice against the profession and pursued it anyway. It was a quiet act of rebellion, and it shaped how he approached every set afterward, wary of nepotism, determined to earn his own reputation from scratch rather than borrow his father's name.
They married in 1999 in a small private ceremony in Monaco. It was so last minute that Cassel joked he'd shown up in shorts since there hadn't been time to plan anything grander. Just the two of them. They called everyone else afterward. The following year, Bellucci starred in Giuseppe Tornatore's Malena, playing a woman in wartime Sicily destroyed by an entire town's desire and resentment at once, a role built almost entirely on silence and body language rather than dialogue. The film's most notorious scene, a public mob assault, looks genuinely dangerous on screen. It wasn't. Tornatore had choreographed every movement in advance and briefed the cast extensively before a single camera rolled. Bellucci has said she trusted him completely, partly because the two had already worked together years earlier on a commercial, when Tornatore told her he had a story in mind, one he promised would someday be made with her and no one else. He called 3 years later to keep that promise. In September 2004, Bellucci and Cassel welcomed their first daughter, Deva. That same year, Bellucci played Mary Magdalene in Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, a role that came to her almost by chance. She was in Rome. She asked a costume designer working on the film who'd been cast as Magdalene. Days later, she was meeting Gibson directly and being offered the part herself. She has since described Magdalene as a figure representing the human condition, someone confronted with something larger than she can explain, arriving at faith only gradually, through experience rather than certainty. It is a description that, looking back at her own life, applies just as easily to Bellucci herself. But the film that tested her most, and the one that put her marriage on screen in the most unflinching way possible, arrived 2 years earlier, in 2002. In Irreversible, directed by Gaspar Noé and told in reverse chronological order across unbroken extended takes, Bellucci and Cassel played a couple whose relationship is shattered by a single act of violence. One sequence, roughly 9 minutes long, depicts a brutal assault on Bellucci's character in a single continuous shot. Few people remember how the world actually reacted to it. At its Cannes premiere, somewhere between 200 and 250 people walked out mid-screening. A fire brigade lieutenant on duty that night
told the BBC he'd never seen anything like it in 25 years on the job. Bellucci herself simply shrugged the reaction off. "This is a film that people love or they hate," she said, "but it's good to have these kind of extremes." What almost nobody knew at the time was that she had effectively directed the pacing of her own most harrowing scene alongside the actor playing her attacker, deciding moment to moment how long it needed to run. Noé himself later admitted an even stranger detail, that he'd used cocaine during the shoot just to keep carrying the heavy rotating cameras the film's unbroken takes required. She has called the film the most violent thing she's ever made, and in the same breath, one of the most poetic, insisting every movement had been choreographed in advance, more dance than accident. It remains one of the strangest choices any real married couple has made on screen, playing out cinema's most devastating relationship collapse a decade before their own actually did. A year later, in 2003, Bellucci stepped into the Matrix sequels as the enigmatic Persephone, joining a cast that had already spent years building its own closed rhythms. Keanu Reeves made it easy, she said, simply because they already knew each other from Dracula a decade earlier. Carrie-Anne Moss went out of her way to protect the newcomer. Persephone existed somewhere between hell and the human world, secretive, dangerous, hungry for real connection underneath the performance. In hindsight, it echoed the balancing act Bellucci was already living at home, glamorous from the outside, quietly more complicated underneath. In May 2010, she and Cassel welcomed their second daughter, Leonie, completing a family that looked, from the outside, like the rarest thing European and American cinema ever managed to produce. Two enormously famous, enormously busy actors who'd made an actual marriage work across 3 countries and 9 films. They ferried 2 little girls between film sets on 3 continents. They still showed up, camera ready, for each new project. To fans watching from a distance, it looked effortless. It wasn't. Then the distance that had once been their secret started working against them. Homes in Rome, Paris, and eventually Rio meant months apart at a stretch, each of them chasing a different production on a different continent. Phone calls replacing dinners, video chats replacing school pickups. In early 2013, Bellucci gave an interview to Grazia that reads now like a woman bracing herself. "No one ever really knows how long a marriage will last," she admitted. Things were fine for the moment. She genuinely couldn't say what the next year held. Around the same time, she told Vanity Fair Spain that she and Cassel owned property on 3 continents and were discussing a 4th in Brazil, while acknowledging almost in passing that they were essentially living separate lives inside a shared marriage. It is a strange, telling detail, a couple still adding real estate together, still expanding a life on paper, even as the life underneath it had already begun quietly coming apart. On August 26, 2013, after 14 years of marriage and 18 years together, they confirmed it. They were separating by mutual agreement. This is the part Bellucci has never dressed up for an audience. It's also the part that says the most about who she actually is. Asked years later why the marriage ended, she didn't deflect. She didn't perform outrage either. "I made the decision," she told Madame Figaro plainly, before adding the harder truth underneath it. "Leaving someone doesn't mean the love disappears.
It just means continuing became impossible. In the Italian edition of Vanity Fair, she went further, calling the split nothing like a wartime divorce. No private laundry aired for an audience. Love in moments like these doesn't vanish, she said. It transforms into something else. A lot can change, but a family, in the way that matters, stays intact regardless. She's admitted plainly that she suffered, that the grief was real, even while insisting they were both equally responsible for the marriage and for its ending. What's remarkable isn't that Bellucci forgave Cassel publicly. It's that she never seemed to need to perform forgiveness at all, because she never let herself become the wounded party in a story other people wanted to write for her. She made the decision, not a woman blindsided by betrayal, a woman who recognized clearly, without self-pity, exactly when something had run its course. That kind of composure rarely earns the sympathy tabloids usually reserve for a scorned wife. Maybe that's exactly why so few people noticed at the time how much quiet strength it took to walk away from an 18-year love story without once painting herself as its casualty. It probably helped that she'd already survived one earlier marriage in her 20s to Claudio Carlos Basso between 1990 and 1994, with no public reckoning at all. She already knew long before Cassel what it costs to end something and keep standing, a lesson most people never have to learn twice before 40. Even Cassel never fully explained what pulled them apart. Instead, he offered a kind of resigned philosophy. Very different animals, he called them, as if the marriage's length was the surprise, not its ending. He's spoken elsewhere about disliking permanence in general, about needing to feel free inside any relationship, or he starts to suffocate. Strange coming from a man describing the mother of his children and the woman he'd once called his first real love, the one who finally made 3 or 4 months feel like nothing at all. Meanwhile, the pattern that followed him kept repeating in public, and Bellucci never had to comment on it because the timeline did the talking for her. Cassel spent almost a year unattached before resurfacing in 2016, linked to a French model named Tina Kunaki, 30 years his junior, who later said meeting him felt like a strange coincidence and admitted she'd never even seen his films beforehand. They married in August 2018 in Bidart, France, and had a daughter, Amazonia, the following spring. That marriage ended in 2023. Within months, Cassel was photographed in Rio de Janeiro with another model, Nara Baptista, roughly 30 years younger than him, as well as celebrating her 27th birthday together not long after, a detail that drew immediate, pointed comments online from fans who noticed the pattern instantly. 2 marriages and 2 serious relationships since Monica Bellucci. In every single one, almost exactly the same 30-year gap. Not once, twice. Too precise to file away as bad luck. Bellucci built something very different in those same years. In 2015, her agent called to say the James Bond production wanted to meet her. She assumed they meant M, the role Judi Dench had played for years, and even told her agent as much, laughing at the idea before she'd fully processed it. They didn't mean M. Sam Mendes wanted her opposite Daniel Craig as a Bond girl in Spectre. At 50 years old, the oldest Bond leading lady in franchise history. Older, in fact, than her own leading man. She's called it almost revolutionary. Proof the industry itself was finally changing, that a mature woman could stand at the center of a story built for decades around youth alone. She kept working restlessly through her 50s and 60s, a television lead in Mozart in the Jungle, playing an opera singer terrified of losing her voice, a French comedy explicitly inspired by her own public image that let her laugh at herself for the first time in years. And finally, in 2024, Tim Burton's Beetlejuice as Dolores, the vengeful undead bride of the title character. She and Burton were already quietly involved a relationship, she confirmed in June 2023, after reconnecting with him at the Lumiere Film Festival, where she presented him a Lifetime Achievement Award, decades after they'd first crossed paths, briefly at Cannes, back when she was still married to Cassel and he was still with Helena Bonham Carter. She said simply that she loved the man, not the celebrated director. That relationship ended gently in September 2025, both sides saying only that they still held deep care for one another, a breakup handled by most accounts with more grace than many marriages manage while fully intact. She never needed to say Vincent Cassel didn't deserve her. She simply kept building a life, film by film, decade by decade, that answered the question on its own. Few fans even registered a smaller, quieter milestone along the way. In 2016, 3 years after the divorce, France awarded her the Legion of Honor, the country's highest civilian distinction for her contribution to French cinema. It came not from Italy, her home country, but from the nation she'd built her second act in, an entire industry effectively choosing to honor her at the exact moment tabloids expected her to be picking up the pieces instead. So here's what we want to know. After hearing her whole story in order, what do you actually think happened? Two people who simply grew apart after nearly 2 decades, worn down by distance and 2 demanding careers, exactly as Bellucci herself has always insisted? Or does a pattern like his, the same 30-year age gap twice over in the years right after her, tell you something he's never quite said out loud? Bellucci never asked anyone to pick a side. She never called herself a victim. And she never let the divorce define her the way the tabloids clearly hoped it would. But now that you've seen it all, from that first curious photograph at 13 to a Bond film at 50, from Rome to Cannes to Rio and back, tell us honestly in the comments, did Vincent Cassel ever really deserve a woman like Monica Bellucci? And if he didn't, what do you think finally made her see it?